strongest cedar splits. I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last. I'll bring them for your supper. Every piece of wood I bring carries a story in life and fungus beetles.
Hey y'all, Kelly Moody here. Welcome to the Ground Shots podcast, a podcast exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling. Currently, I'm recording this episode in a canvas yome. It's a mix between a dome and a yurt, but the walls are very thin, and Yep, you could probably hear a chicken in the background. I've been thinking about what it would be like to be recording the podcast and the structure. I've had to accept the reality that I don't live in a walled house most of the time, or in a structure that has thick enough walls to hold out all sounds. I've learned over the years different ways to kind of deal with that in the field, but yeah, it's just the beauty of doing sort of a project like this that is in different places and environments and isn't perfect. So right now I'm looking out my window that's just a screen, and it's so beautiful. That's just going to be me chatting today, which I haven't done a lot here on the podcast. I did that one episode, which was kind of a little bit of a story about how this project started and how it evolved to what it is now and what it's becoming. I realized that me and the life that I live, it's a huge part of this work, and my perspective, which often very much comes out in the podcast when I'm in conversation with other people or in my plant profiles where I'm chatting about plants in a written form, that often brings in other things to think about, like other names that are used for plants besides Latin, or considering what a common name or the multiple common names of a plant might say about how we think about the plant, or the confusion that sometimes comes up with certain plants, like of course the cedar thing when you think about juniper, for example. Like, what is a cedar? It's like a whole thing. And I go there, and sometimes in written format it's a little easier for me to go into these sort of spider-webbed non-linear tangents and weave them back together. So for this episode today, I'm just chatting about place. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the place where I am and some of the plants I've been engaging with and dancing with. I've been saying dancing with a lot lately. I kind of like that way of thinking about being in relationship to other beings, to rocks, to people, to structures, to all the bits and pieces that make up our lives. And I think it's kind of cool to speak a little bit about the living beings that I'm dancing with too, because we all have some sort of relationship to plants and animals and other life forms and animate beings like rocks. We all have stories and layers of how we do that, and I think sharing a slice in time and place, a land capsule of sorts. Land capsules, these words that I used to use for these subscription packages I used to send out, but it is sort of a conceptual way of thinking about time and place and its uniqueness, and also the way that time and place have layers. Anything that we have experienced in the past, a relationship we've experienced in the past in a certain way, has a story that we carry with us that we relate to the worlds that we're in now. And for me, traveling and also being really rooted in places at times in my life have given me stories to relate to every other spiral of my life. Every year is a new layer that is unique yet rooted in the layer before, or has tendrils connecting to the layer before. You know, I'm in a place right now that I lived for several years in more of a steady, steadfast, and routine connected way, you know, really close to the land in the sense of living more outside and having my daily routines be about tending plants on the land that I was, or out in the public land nearby. And being back here now after many years of being on the road in the west of the so-called US, coming back here to the south, the humid, muggy south as it's been lately, I've been really dancing with being on this layer of the spiral. You know, you can think of a cinnamon bun or something even. I really do. Like, the middle layer is different from the outer layer. And then, of course, in our life, they continue much more than just 2 rounds. But 2 or 3 rounds that a cinnamon bun metaphor would be. Maybe that's not the best metaphor. I'm just thinking about how good cinnamon buns would be right now. Not something I've eaten in a while. But I am in this place that I have had deep relationship with in the past, and I have really interesting memory. Like, I remember very specific details about certain places and even people. I have a friend the other day that I was talking to, and I was like, you know, it's weird, but when I think about this one particular plant, I think about how, like, 7 years ago, your Chinese doctor told you need to drink tea with the leaf of this plant because linden, it was the tree, basswood or linden, and how your Chinese doctor told you needed to drink tea of this plant because you were burning the candle at both ends, and that you needed that. And I just remember stuff like that, and I associate that tree with that information, that story that I received at one point many years ago. And my friend was like, I don't even remember that, but it makes sense that I would be given that plant to play with and to dance with in my life. And yeah, I have like weird memory like that. I remember where particular patches of plants are all over anywhere I've been. But here where I am right now, I'm like going around checking for certain plants. I remember being in certain places, like a patch of calamus on the farm that I'm on right now. And there's not as much of it as there used to be, but I found a few plants. I think there's this bamboo that got planted here that's starting to shade out, or like outcompete many of the riparian plants that are along this creek. But I looked for it and no one else here knew that it was here. And I was like, well, I know a story behind this calamus patch because this other person who used to live here planted it one time and then told me about it on a plant walk. Hey, I planted that calamus 5 years ago on that land. You should go look for it. And then it was like a scavenger hunt and I found it, and then I made mead out of it at that time and then drank some of that mead this winter actually. I made it in 2014 and stored it away at my parents' in their barn, and then I pulled out a dusty bottle this winter and drank some of it. When I got back here, I looked for it and I found some, and it was so amazing. My heart just lights up when I find plants that I used to pay attention to. And everywhere I go, I feel like I have this sort of story awareness like that. And so it's been really sweet to kind of be here and move about in that way. Like, I don't even realize that I remember some of these things. I think all of us have this in certain ways in the world, and the way that we relate and map out the world and our experience of it in our life as it moves forward, the timeline of our lives. We map out in relationship to these stories. And yeah, really discovering them inside of myself as I move about a landscape, and like just know to go look for something in a place just intuitively. Like, there it is, I'm gonna go. Another one is the cardinal flower here on the land. It's a lobelia, and I think it's a lobelia cardinalis or cardinalis. It's a red flowering plant. It's super beautiful, and it comes up all over this land if you let it go to seed, if you don't mow it down. I remember it being here before. I remember it coming up in the garden beds, and now I'm seeing it all over the hillside and in different other parts of the land that I don't remember it being before, and it's just really beautiful to see its leaves, its soft leaves coming up, and it's like seeing an old friend. It really is. Also, while I'm here on the land that I'm on, I've been growing food in a garden format, and I haven't done that in a while, at least been able to follow through with like a growing season fully like this in a while. And that used to be such a big part of my identity. I've started gardens for other people in other places and helped people in their gardens, and last year in Southwest Colorado, Gabe and I planted a little bit of food on his parents' land, but we like didn't get to see it through the whole season because we were on the Colorado Trail. We did get to eat some of it in the fall when we came back, but that is something I've been doing too lately, and really thinking differently about how I grow annual plants. What are annuals in this climate? I really feel inclined to plant perennials or self-seeding annuals, or like plants that can like continue forth and spread, or or become a part of the wild, so-called self-willed landscape. But annual vegetable gardening is an interesting, fun dance of working with like past human tending stories, because things like sweet potatoes or corn, for example, or winter squash, there's so much story behind the genetics that we can cultivate now. Like, if we didn't, then many of those stories could disappear. So in a way, we're continuing this time capsule forth. We're like bringing it forth through by planting out some of these seeds or cuttings or whatnot. So having an opportunity this summer to kind of play with some annual plantings and then getting to enjoy some of the foods is really exciting. Traveling on the road, I tended to be able to forage often and get food from friends' farms and land, but often I found myself buying kale at times, and I'm like, this feels really strange after being a farmer at one point, like buying kale. So it's fun to be able to do a little tending in one place. And after doing land tending project of planting seeds on the Colorado Trail and beyond with Gabe, which is like, that's definitely more of his focus, it's really changed my perspective on how to engage the landscape and the world and land around me, and not just tending things or growing things just for myself. And the engagements I have with plants as a relationship that I don't want to just have in the sense of I'm going to forage that to put it up or to eat it and then not go back again when it's died back. With ramps, for example, you can harvest ramp leaves without harvesting the bulbs underground, and harvest a few of them to eat and enjoy, and it's going to be okay for the population. But even if you do it that way versus digging up the bulbs, it's still important to go back and gather seed too and replant that way. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about a lot more now. And the landscape of southern Appalachia, where I am right now, is so jungly and green and lush and rich and full that what it looks like here to do purposeful land tending work is really different than what it would look like in the Southwest or many places in the Intermountain West or the Pacific West. And thinking about specific plant tending in the Southwest and the concept of water you have to think about is pretty different than somewhere like here where it rains regularly and you have to think about too much water or how the water and the sun affect so much of what will work on certain landscapes, certain hillsides, and the succession of the landscape here. Everything wants to become a forest, especially since there's not regular burning happening here. And the tending that happens often is, in a way, invasive plant removal, even though I have done plenty of podcast episodes over the past year on questioning what is an invasive plant altogether. And I still feel like, though I'm holding space for questioning even the concept of invasive plants on this podcast, it doesn't mean that where I am right now, where there's, say, a lot of multiflora rose, that I shouldn't remove some multiflora rose or use it as medicine or for basketry. The flower petals are blooming right now and they smell amazing, and it's an amazing, abundant rose medicine source right now that's out and about. And so there's no way I feel like that the multiflora rose is ever going to go away here, for example. And I'm definitely love this plant and feel grateful for it. And also what could be a tending practice in a place like this where so much is in competition for space is that you can decide to take something that's abundant like that and make space for something else that's less abundant. And of course the motivation for what to choose, like what to make space for and to take away or make more of, is something we all navigate and decide and choose in the moment. You know, there's so many little choices like that, like thinning out some of the trees on the land where we are right now. Like, I'm not going to cut a dogwood down. And it's a whole story as to why I wouldn't do that. You know, dogwoods are special. Some of them have disease issues. They have really amazing wood. There's all these reasons why I'm not going to cut the dogwood down. But I might cut a couple of the tulip poplars and cherries down because they are more abundant. They grow faster. There's a lot more of them. And so when selecting things to tend in a place, the stories and layers of that plant and the ecology and what's happening currently with that plant are really important to consider. So there's so much of that here. There's so many ways I could speak to that. I mean, there's poison ivy all around the space where I am right now. I'm not sure exactly what to do about that because I don't really get it, but I feel like it has some magic. Some people call it sister ivy, but she has some magic of boundaries. And this hillside used to be a cow pasture and was overgrazed before the landowners that now caretake this place bought it. And so this land has been slowly trying to mend itself over the years, and poison ivy is a plant that comes up in disturbance to help mend. And in a way, I feel like often it's to keep humans sort of, because we get the rash, you know, to keep us a little more cautious. So yeah, I've definitely been shocked at times by the difference in what it means to stay put for a while longer than I'm used to in a very humid, muggy place that you can't just necessarily lay on the ground somewhere and sleep outside. You never know when it could rain on you, and there's like ants and spiders, and even the space that we're staying in right now is like has critters, you know, ants, and it's there's no way to keep them fully out, and you have to kind of accept it. But the shock of a place that now feels so different to me in a lot of ways as me being a different person, but I'm really trying to enjoy it. It's like taking a little while to get out of a little bit of a depressed state that I've been in since the winter. I tend to get seasonal depression. I want to speak about one of the plants I've been working with lately. Nettles is a very popular wild food and medicine that a lot of people harvest or make medicine with in the spring and all over the country. And I'm speaking to my perspective of knowing like the US, so-called US, given that I've like spent the most time. I'm American, and I like spent the most time right here in this place. And yet I do research and look at the ways that the plants here are connected to plants all over the world. Nettles is something that when I was traveling in California, I harvested and saw growing, and Pacific Northwest, and even in the Southwest. Here in Appalachia, there's tons of nettles around. There's a woodland species of nettles that is a native species of nettle that is not in the same genus as the European stinging nettle that many people know about. It's Laportia canadensis, but it is in the Urticaceae family, same family as the European stinging nettle, which is Urtica dioica. There are actually native stinging nettles besides the wood nettles. It's ideal that you harvest it before it goes to flower because of just the compounds in the leaves change, and it can be irritating to the kidneys. So, but I was going to say that there are native nettle species, like some of the ones in California. There's like a California nettle. And if you're on the West Coast and you harvest nettles along the coast in those like coastal alder-filled, beautiful waterways that you find a lot of those big nettles. You've seen some of these native nettles, and then I've also seen these really tiny leafed nettles in the Sierra foothills. So the native nettles in the West, like the California nettle, are also urticas related to the European stinging nettle. Again, different from like the wood nettle that people harvest in the forest in Appalachia. And there's another nettle that I've hung out with on Kauai. Mamake is a nettle tree. It's actually like a woody tree shrub or a small tree that grows endemic to Hawaii, I'm pretty sure. I think that maybe it is grown though the Pacific and other places, but that is a plant that I got to see and meet and hang out with and drank tea of while I was on Kauai visiting a friend a couple years ago, and I featured some folks from the Kauai Food Forest here on the podcast. Mamake has all these different sort of phenotypes and forms with different colors, and such a beautiful plant. And people also drank a tea of the leaves. There's many other ways that people use the medicine there, but for like the mineral content, which is a way that people use nettles in the US and in Europe and all over the world too, is for the nutritive qualities of nettle. So European stinging nettle and the native nettles in the US are pretty stingy. They have these little tiny needle-like structures that have a compound that they release when they poke you that creates a histamine response. And for a lot of people, it is temporary and it doesn't bother them too much, and it actually can be medicinal to be stung and bring circulation to an area. But for some people, it can cause bigger reactions. I know for me, for a few years, for some reason, after I used to I harvested nettles barehanded for years, and then all of a sudden, the sort of inflammation from the sting would last like 2 days and be really swollen and painful and like feel like I have nerve damage or something. That happened for a while, and then I stopped harvesting them barehanded after that for a bit, and this spring I've been kind of doing it barehanded more again, and it's kind of gone back to the way it was for me, where it is less problematic. Even like 2 springs ago in the Southwest when I was harvesting, and I was having that thing happen where I felt like I almost had like blisters on my hands for a couple days afterwards. And you know, I know there's like tips and tricks that people talk about with like ways to harvest nettles that would be advantageous to not getting stung as much, like quickly in a certain form, or, you know, obviously using gloves is helpful too. But I tend to just try to be careful when I harvest nettles and just deal with the fact that I'm going to get stung a little bit. And so I'm really happy that this spring I haven't been getting too stung, or like I haven't been getting that same reaction I used to get. So I've been harvesting European nettles that is growing on the land where I am, and then on another friend's land, and drying the leaves for tea and making food out of the nettles. I'm that kind of person that tends to need more iron rich. It's got some good mineral content to the plant. It's still not the same as eating animal based iron, but for me, consuming something so mineral rich like stinging nettle is really good for my constitution. And so I've been really enjoying that in my diet here and there, and sauteing up the stinging nettles. Or you can make an infusion of the nettle leaf and drink a tea out of it. So the wood nettles that I've been gathering hasn't gone to flower yet, and I've been gathering a handful here and there when I go to the woods, and then drying just the leaf for tea and food. I would say that they're not quite as medicinal as the stinging nettle, but they're a great leaf to dry to then have for later to add to soups and stews, and for tea as well. Again, as a nutritive tonic, food is medicine in a way. I mean, the wood nettles definitely sting as well, but not as quite as much, I feel like, as the European nettles. And the wood nettles tend to stay in the shady forest, and the stinging nettles can be in the forest or in the open sun or in meadows. They could be in the multiflora rows, they could be in the deep forest. The wood nettles tend to be in the shade. They have bigger leaves and are alternate in leaf structure for the most part, and European nettles are opposite leaved. And some tip that I was given by an herbalist, Paul Strauss, actually, who lives in Southeast Ohio, when I was interning at the United Plant Savers there back in like 2011, I think. He loves nettles so much, wants to be able to have it fresh as much as possible throughout the season. He basically mows down his nettle patch multiple times a season so that he can get the fresh pre-flowering greens all season. So that's a really cool way to restart the nettles. If you have a big patch, you could do part of it and then have them in different stages all the time, and of course eventually letting them go to seed. And the nettle seed is also food and medicine, but it's a really cool way. Like, I harvest from a patch, and then once it gets to a point where I'm kind of done, I will cut it down, let it come back up again and get some more, and then eventually letting it go to seed. One way you can tend nettle patches is to do divisions. There's so many plants that you can just take a chunk of and put somewhere else, and it will grow and propagate itself and make a new patch in that place. And so if you want nettles on your land or in a place where you like to go, you can do that. You could take a chunk of it and move it. It's really cool. So you can put it in your garden, but it can take over. So if you don't want to always have a stinging friend around, you might not want to put it right in the middle of where you're going to be all the time. Nettle is often used for fiber as well. It's definitely a historical fiber used for making fabric and cloth. I haven't made a whole lot of cordage and whatnot from it, but I would love to play with that at some point. I've been kind of dancing with some other plants that have been traditionally used historically in many cultures all over the world. Nettle is one of those, too, that has been used in different cultures all over the world. It has been found in archaeological sites in like parts of Europe and stuff. Fabrics or bags made from the spun fiber and woven cloth of nettle. It's so amazing. It's such a hardy fiber to use, and to harvest the part that you would use for fiber, it would be kind of after the plant has already gone through its life cycle and has gone to flower, and then it's sort of in the fall once it's sort of died down. Often nettles will kind of have a resurge in the fall too. They'll die down and then the roots will send up another little bit of young plant again, but like the stalks that have gone to maturity and then died back after they've redded for a bit, both maybe from the weather or from you gathering them and then intentionally redding them. And redding is like a whole other conversation, but you can then process that fiber into cordage. That's a good way to start, is to experiment with that. Go and find a patch and look for old stalks and see what the fiber feels like and looks like in your fingers, and like how strong it is. The cellulose too in the plant will be there, and you have to get that out. But just want to throw that in your ear because I think many plants have many ways that humans can engage them. And nettle is a cool one where like most parts of the plant have some way that we can take them in or use them in our worlds. And I feel like that is like reverence, you know. And it's an easy one too to be able to so-called wildcraft in a way that doesn't really harm the plant, like in the sense of making less of it in a way that would not be beneficial to the plant populations, and that's easy to tend. And of course there's different nettles. There's so-called native ones and ones that have been introduced and naturalized, and we can kind of engage with any of those at at the time of year where it makes the most sense and bring them into our lives. And I think that too is like such an amazing way to enrich our bodies and the stories of that plant. So I have been gathering pedicularis leaf as well, and eating sochan, cut leaf coneflower. It's a Rudbeckia. I've also been eating young basswood leaves and dandelion leaf. So I will, I think, leave this episode at that because I want to make it a little shorter, and I can speak to y'all again in future episodes about other plants I've been hanging out with and making medicine with. Before I leave, though, one more note and story about nettles. The first time that I really got to know nettles, I thought I would share this with y'all before parting ways because it's kind of funny. I loved nettles, and I first met nettles intentionally when I lived in New Hampshire and was working on a farm. It was one of the first plants I kind of tuned into. It's kind of, it's pretty easy to know whether it's nettles or not because you get stung when you touch it. And I was doing an apprenticeship at the time with an herbalist up in Vermont, and I was working on this organic farm during the weekdays. And after work one day, I was walking around the farm and I noticed that there was a nettle patch in the middle of this cow field. There was an organic dairy on the farm, and they separate the adolescent cows from the adult cows for different reasons, and they had the adolescent, like, teenager cows in this one field. And I was walking around, no one else was really on the farm at the time, and I noticed this huge nettle patch in the middle of this field. I was standing at the fence line and I was like, I would love to have a few of those nettles for dinner. And they look so big and beautiful, and I was so excited because you get excited about plants sometimes and you see them and you're like, oh my god, there you are. And I decided to jump the fence and walked over to the nettle patch. Didn't really fully have a plan, like, the careful picking with your fingers. I don't even know if I had a bag with me or anything. I just was like, I want to go check out these nettles and maybe grab a few for dinner. And I got over to the patch, and I suddenly, a whole herd of these adolescent cows started to run full force towards me. And I got kind of scared. I grew up in the rural South, like in rural Southern Virginia, and my grandpa had cows when I was growing up, and they always trained me to be super afraid of them because as a kid they did not want me to wander into the cow field and get trampled by the bull, the one bull they had out in the fields that they would say was mean and he will hurt you. So I had this like kind of fear of cows, but for some reason I still felt like it was a good idea to jump the fence. So these big creatures, although they generally are pretty docile and like won't mess you up or anything, but at the time I got real scared from that herd of adolescent cows chasing after me, and I still wanted to get a few nettles, so I like grabbed a whole handful of them with my arms and tried to like break a bunch of them to take with me so that I could at least get a few. And I like then ran with this bundle of nettles in my bare arms across the fields trying to get away from these adolescent cows. And I threw the bundle over the fence and then jumped over the fence just as they got to the fence line because they chased after me. And then I lay on the ground stinging all over from this very adrenalized moment, even though I'm sure I would have been fine, that they probably wouldn't have like They were just probably curious about me, like, being in their pasture, or maybe thought I had some snack for them. But I thought I'd leave you with that story. I did then take those nettles and make some dinner with them, but I was pretty stung up for the rest of the evening. One more thing, y'all. I feel like maybe I didn't say clearly enough in the beginning of this, but as far as nettles are concerned, do not forget to cook them or steam them in some form before eating them. You do not want to really try to eat them raw. That's a big thing. Steaming them for food or in making an infusion for tea will make it so that the stingers do not sting you anymore, and they are safe to eat at that point. Some people juice them. I think you could probably get away with doing that fresh, but if you do a quick steam and then juice them, that's even better. And yeah, a lot of people make pesto out of them and that kind of thing too after steaming them a little bit. So just to let you know that here real quick, just to make sure that no one goes and tries to put them in a salad raw. As someone who educates about and speaks about plants a lot, I have to always just say that I am not a medical doctor and I cannot make health claims and say that anything is proven to do anything. So just to let you know, anything I say about plants and like their medicinal or edible use, I have to also kind of like cushion that disclaimer in there as well. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks y'all for tuning in to this solo episode, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, y'all, take care.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last, I'll bring them for your supper. Every piece of wood I bring carries a story in lichen, fungus, beetles, maze. It's the same to you all.